Chapter 13. Another night, and another full day, and yet another evening passed, dragged, pulled along so slowly that it was maddening. Water in the morning, 4 plastic cups. He figured that as close to a quart. 4 more cups at night. 2 quarts equaled half a gallon. His daily ration. Hot as it became, he didn't feel thirsty on half a gallon a day, except for the first night. The evening after the tanker nearly hit him, he opened 1 can of beef stew for food and ate it cold. He didn't want to waste any of the small amount of alcohol for the stove on something that didn't need cooking. As soon as he took a bite, the hunger became uncontrollable, and he wolfed down half the can before he could stop. It was viciously salty, and he had to drink water as soon as he put the plastic spoon down. Then he forced himself to cover the can with a piece of plastic wrap and save the other half for tomorrow. He tried fishing the next day. The little plastic tackle case had a small variety of silver spoons and some feathered lures, and he tried them all. The rod and reel were strung with a heavy line and thin steel cable for a leader. No matter the lure, fish swallowing or deep, jiggling or letting it hang still, it didn't matter, nothing bit. It was as if the ocean were completely empty of fish. He fished for 5 hours without a bite, through the day and up to the food time for the second day after the tanker, and never got a single indication there was a chance of catching anything, big or little. He would even have welcomed the shark, but nothing came, which didn't help his frustration. He then unwrapped the second half of the stew, but it had been sitting in the sink all day in the heat and smelled funny. He ate it anyway, and within half an hour was sick to his stomach and had to sit on the chamber pot bucket kept in the small compartment beneath the front bunk. The sickness didn't last long, but kept him doubled over for an hour or so and left him weak enough to want to sleep again, and that ended another day, another dead day. The learning experience wasn't successful either. In complete boredom, the next day he tied a large towel beneath the broom and over to the handrails on either side to make an awning and sat in the shade. The inside of the cabin was so hot it was unbelievable and unlivable. He thought he'd sit and think and try to remember things he must have learned that were still in his mind. The idea was sound, but he couldn't make it work. He knew he had read stories about the sea, knew that Owen had told him many things, knew that he had learned some things from watching television and movies. But that all came back to him was the scene from Jaws in which the shark was trying to eat the back end of the boat, which Owen had sold him was completely nonsense, and the beginning of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, which was nice, except it didn't help him in his particular situation. Of course, once Jaws and Lincoln were in his head, he couldn't get them out, and he sat for an hour thinking of different scenes from the movie and trying to remember everything he could about Lincoln, which wasn't much. And that bothered him because he didn't think it was quite right that he should know more about a funky movie about a mechanical shark than about a president, so he got into trying to summon up more about Lincoln than Jaws. And when it was finally done, he figured at the end that they were about even because he remembered the mole on Lincoln's cheek and thought that was a pretty good deal. He had fretted away most of the afternoon without learning anything, and he leaned back and saw the plane. It was a high jet, leaving a white contrail headed for east to west right over the top of him, and for a second his heart jumped. There were people there inside that little speck of aluminum, just as there had been people in the tanker, people that close. Then he realized it didn't matter if all he could see of the huge plane was a tiny speck barreling along in front of the white line. No one in the plane could possibly see him, even if he were looking, which they probably weren't, and even if they looked and saw him, somehow it would just be a sailboat. Without flares or some way to attract attention, it didn't matter if anyone saw him or not. He probably looked again at the plane. Rather, he did look again at the plane. The people were probably sitting there, and the flight attendants were bringing them food and cold pop, probably lots of cold pop and hot food in those little trays with more cold pop whenever they wanted it. with lots of ice, probably on their way to Hawaii, and they could probably just eat or drink cold drinks whenever they wanted to. Ah, he swore. It was enough. The situation was bad enough without making it worse by torturing himself. He would think himself into another layer of hate. And somehow evening came again, and he went into the cabin, which cooled instantly and felt wonderful once the sun went down because the seawater kept the hull cool. To eat and drink, he ate half a can of chili, put the rest in the small ice chest beneath the steps. It wasn't cold because he had no ice, but he felt a little cooler to his touch than the air. He hoped the chili would keep. He fell asleep on the captain's bunk without a cover, his head resting again on a life jacket. Completely sick of the day, his mind filled with pictures of a white shark and Lincoln and a bunch of people on a plane drinking cold pop and eating great plates of steaming food. Disgusting. Something had awakened him, and he lay listening, his senses keyed alert, the memory of the tanker fresh in his mind. Almost totally dark, a sliver of a moon made some light, but very little of it came into the dark cabin. He held his breath and listened, but nothing. No engines, no thumps on the hull, no danger. Then it came, a gentle, almost puffing, whispering sound. Woof, woof. The mainsail lifting. Wind. He rolled out of the bunk, put his head out of the cabin top. In the faint light, the sea seemed the same, swells sliding under him, the boat moving easily on them. Then he felt it. Woof, woof. A faint breeze, a soft on his cheek, just enough to move the ends of his hairs. The sail moving back and forth gently. Wind. Oh, yes, he thought. Sweet wind. Fine wind. Wind, wind, wind. He jumped into the cockpit and untied the towel which he still stretched from the broom to make an awning. He threw the towel into the cabin, then slammed the tiller over to the side and held it with his leg while he pulled it on the main sheet and cleated it off. Then he tied the jib a bit, but left it loose and billowing to catch the light air. The movement of the helm pulled the bow over slowly, ever so slowly, until it was pointed dead east, 90 degrees on the compass numbers glowing in the dark, and now the sails filled the two ghost wings against the sky, and the frog started to move. He found, after a bit of experimentation, that he couldn't point her very high toward the direction of the wind, which was almost straight out of the north, because in such a light wind she would just stop. But if he sailed across the wind, let the sails fill on a soft broad reach, she could keep moving, and soon he heard the wake bubbling as she gained speed, held 3 knots, moved almost to 4, then back to 3.5, sailing. Oh yes, he thought again. Oh yes, wind, come and take me home. She was sailing dead east and making 3.5 knots, and that way lay the land. The way lay California. The way lay home. Take me home, wind. Take me home, wind. Home, wind. Home, wind.